Hi, I'm Steve Clemons, and I have a question. Angela Merkel stepped in to lead the West at a time when the United States was trying to shrink away from the world stage. But who will fill the gap next time, or even now? Let's get to the bottom line. For a time, she was the most powerful woman in the world. Angela Merkel became Germany's first female chancellor in 2005, and she served for 4 terms, staying in power for 16 years, a whole generation. While former U.S. President Donald Trump closed America's borders to folks fleeing the wars in the Muslim world, she opened Germany for 1 million refugees. And while he dilly-dallied on the coronavirus, she gave a famous speech, speaking as a mother and as a scientist and telling the world to really take it seriously. She became the one people looked to, and America started to fade into the background as a source of noise and chaos. And on Russia, Trump kowtowed to President Vladimir Putin, while Merkel didn't buy what he was selling. But on the other hand, the extremist right grew exponentially while she was leader in Germany and all over Europe. So what kind of mixed legacy does she leave behind for her country, for Europe, and for relations with the United States? And what does her moving on mean for America's own engagement in the world? Well, despite the fact that Merkel is famous for being a very private person, we're really fortunate to be talking to someone who spent years researching her and finding people to explain her worldview. She is Kati Marton, former ABC News correspondent in Germany and author of The Chancellor, The Remarkable Odyssey of Angela Merkel. Kati, thank you so much for joining us. Look, you know, what I'm really interested in is those 4 years of America First under Donald Trump, when Angela Merkel stepped in. Your late husband, Richard Holbrooke, said America would have been in strategic contraction from its responsibilities in the world. My question to you is, what would America look like today if Angela Merkel had not stepped in?
Great questions, Steve, and let's deal with them one at a time. But first, let me just thank you for having me on. It's always such a pleasure to talk to you, and you're always the most thought-provoking interlocutor. So Merkel leaves the world stage an extraordinary legacy. She leaves a template for a new way to govern, which is, how shall I put it, an ego-free way to govern, whereby the leader of Europe's most powerful state, Germany, focused on the people, not on herself. There isn't a single, I'm sorry to say this, they're mostly men, politician who is as lacking in hubris as she was. And this had an enormous impact on her ability to get things done, because she was always the last person to leave the negotiating table because her feelings were not involved. She didn't get upset when either Putin or Trump tried to fake their way and bluster their way through a negotiation, or in Trump's case, toss candies at her, saying, "Don't say I never gave you anything, Angela." She just kept that absolute unmovable facade, and pressed on, soldiered on. So ego-free, because she was at the table, be it on Ukraine. She left a template for how the world should deal with what looks to be close to a renewed Russian aggression into Ukraine, because she was in charge of halting that aggression in 2014. Basically, Barack Obama handed off the leadership of the West to her at that time because he'd given up on Putin. He said, "This man does nothing but lie to me." Well, he lied to her too, but Merkel didn't have the luxury, sitting right next door to the big bear, of detaching from trying to hold him to account. So she leaves. You already referred to her remarkable humanitarian intervention in 2015, and let me just say that those 1 million, mostly Middle Eastern refugees, have been integrated into a formerly mostly Christian homogeneous society, and it's a back burner issue. So again, she has left a model for how to do that if the world will heed her lessons. So, you know, she did all this without saying, "Look at me, look at what I've done," and thereby demonstrated that you can get a whole lot done if you don't insist on taking credit for it. You know, so in terms of the shape of the world now, you know, I miss Merkel already. just a few days into the post-Merkel period, because she gave us all a sense of calm and things will be taken care of because I am here and I will look after things. There is really no one who duplicates her remarkable journey. And I'm sure we're going to talk about that. There are many good politicians in Germany. One of them is her successor, but it's her extraordinary personal journey, which is what I set out to capture in the Chancellor, that makes her unique, and she now enters history.
It's an incredibly fascinating book, not only by what you discovered and researched, but also by her hostility to anyone who talked about her and shutting them down, cutting them out of her life, and the enforced humility, if you will, that she wanted around her life and circumstances. So I find it incredibly well done, well-researched work, because you did it under very difficult circumstances. But when you get into that journey that she took, I had a meeting recently with an ambassador from a former Soviet communist country in Eastern Europe, and he said, "You Americans toss around the words socialism and communism too casually to describe the debates going on." He says, "I lived under communism. You have no idea how bad that was and what the dimensions were of that." Her dad was a pastor who willingly moved into East Germany to be in that world. And I'd love to kind of hear about the seed that got planted in Angela Merkel of being in that situation and how that remarkable journey affected who she became.
Right. Well, Steve, you've just hit it on the head. It was her formation, the double influence of 35 years spent in a police state, the police state of East Germany, and being the pastor's daughter. So a very strict family of faithful Lutherans, where responsibility was instilled in her, the need to look after the less fortunate, which again we saw play out in real time with her refugee policy, which shocked all her fellow European neighbors who did not come through for her as she anticipated. And I have to say, Steve, that if I had an advantage in piercing the enigma of Merkel, the deliberately constructed enigma, it was that I too grew up in a communist, in a totalitarian state, Hungary in my case. And I was the child of political prisoners, and I was very conscious of the fact that you had to keep your own counsel, and you didn't know if your next door neighbor was informing on you. In the case of Merkel, it turned out that one of the people she most trusted, her lab partner, because as you know she's a physicist by training, was a full-time informer. So no wonder that she keeps to herself and is deeply suspicious and doesn't like to open up, and certainly doesn't open up to journalists or biographers. She frankly doesn't think it's any of our business what she does outside the chancellery. But to me, that was the part of the story that was most interesting. Far less interesting are the machinations of the Byzantine world of German politics. Really interesting was how this triple outsider, so a woman in a male political culture, a scientist, and from the East, how did she gain control of the politics not only of her own country for 16 years? That's 4 elections. Who can match that today in a democratic way? She managed to transform that country. So she didn't just hold on to power. She very quietly transformed a country which she now has left a different society than the one she found. She achieved marriage equality. She expanded opportunities for women, and of course, has made Germany the most refugee-friendly country in the world. It really, when you think about it, Steve, knowing as much as you do about about German history and the dark chapter of the Third Reich, that she really has succeeded in making Germany not only the economic powerhouse of Europe, which it was well on its way to becoming, but the moral center. That, to me, is the most astonishing. I mean, who is vying for that role?
Right.
Sadly, not us, not the United States.
Well, we measure time oftentimes in terms of leaders. And so during the time of Merkel, we had 4 American presidents. We had George W. Bush, we had Barack Obama, we had Donald Trump, and we had Joe Biden. Do you have a sense of how she read the trend, the strengths and weaknesses of these American leaders she was dealing with? Who did she like the most?
Yeah. Well, first of all, she reveres America. She attributes to America her second chance as a free woman and as a politician, because she was a scientist only because she had chosen science as a safe place to park her brilliant mind, and she is brilliant, out of the reach of the police state. So she had on her wall a picture of Bush the elder and of Reagan, who were her Cold War heroes. She had great personal rapport. This may surprise your viewers, with George W. Bush. They clicked. And that had real-time results. They only overlapped for 2 years, but they've continued to be friends. She had a rocky relationship at the beginning with Barack Obama, although they're much more alike than she and George W. Bush. They're both cerebral, and they're both people who don't really love politics or politicians. But she found him to be, at the outset, rather arrogant and in too much of a hurry, and she was offended that he wanted to give a speech before he was even elected president on Berlin's most iconic corner, which is the Brandenburg Gate. So she vetoed that. He took that very well and blamed his staff for having chosen that. And then, of course, she discovered that he'd been tapping her private phone, her cell phone. Whether he'd given the instructions for that or others in the administration.
I just want to stop there. I just want to stop there for a second. She found out the U.S. president was spying on her, right? And how did she take that?
Not well, as you can imagine. But when I interviewed the American ambassador in Berlin at the time, John Emerson, and he said that was a wasted year between Berlin and Washington as a result of that really unnecessary tapping, which, by the way, got them nothing, because Merkel, being as suspicious as she is, would never say anything into her cell phone beyond where are we going for dinner. So they got nothing, and they succeeded in deeply offending her. When Obama visited her on a kind of a makeup call, she took him out to the balcony, which is off her former office in the Chancellery, and she pointed to the remnants of the wall there, the terrible wall that had kept her prisoner for 35 years, and she said, "Now do you see why this has so upset me and my people, because we lived behind we were prisoners of
right.
of the Stasi state."
Well, Kati, one of the reasons I wanted to talk about this book was not just because of Angela Merkel, who's stepping out, and his history now, but her relevance of some of what she did in dealing with the challenges of the day. And as we look at 170,000 plus troops amassed on the Ukrainian border from Russia, as we look at human rights violations in China, Xinjiang, the rise of Xi Jinping, not only in Chinese history, but his power in the world, I'm really interested. She dealt with both of these leaders. She took blandness to an art form, but she also took doggedness, to a political art form. And I felt this palpably in your book. And I don't see anyone engaging either Xi Jinping or Vladimir Putin in the same way that she did. Am I wrong?
No, you're not wrong. No, no, the doggedness is what remains to be seen whether anyone has that. But don't forget that we, the United States, are in steadier hands than we were under Trump, and she exhaled when Biden was elected because of course. Trump was not serious in negotiating with either Putin or Xi Jinping. Merkel, has paid more calls to Beijing than any other head of state since 2005, when she first identified that China was ascendant and would be the challenge for the West. She's paid a call every year. She's cultivated the Beijing leadership up and down the food chain. She knows who to talk to about what. And although she does not believe in confrontational diplomacy, and she would never call out either Xi Jinping or Putin in front of the press, for example, because she thinks that's just male bombast that leads nowhere. She is tougher when the door is closed, and she does call out, or did call out, Xi Jinping on the Uyghurs and on Hong Kong, and makes it very clear that you're going to force our hand. You're going to force us to be much tougher if you proceed down this road. But she, Steve, she's not an idealist. She does not think that the arc of the moral universe bends toward justice. She's a realist, I wouldn't say that she's a Kissingerian real politician, but she does believe that humanity is capable of terrible crimes, evil. I mean, her parents' generation suffered under the Nazis, and she herself suffered under the German communists. So she deals with the world as she finds it, and believes. I would describe her as a determined optimist. For her, the image of Sisyphus. This is an image she uses frequently, rolling that rock up the mountain only to have it fall on his head every few feet, and then keeps going. That for her is not a pessimistic image. It's what she does. It's what, and again, this goes back to her Lutheran foundation of the quiet work of salvation. That's what she did as chancellor for 16 years.
Well, not only is Germany and Europe, the United States being tested by Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin, they're being tested internally. And while she was in office, the Alternative for Germany, a party of extreme Islamophobia, extreme anti-immigrant groups, earned 12% of the electorate in 2017 and grew. We've seen the rise of populists in the United States and elsewhere. Do you have any insights about her views on those groups? How that, and her concern about it, how if she were still in power or maybe now out of power, that element needs to be confronted.
Yes. And she's by no means a perfect politician. She's human. She has her blind spots. And one of them was that she didn't deal strenuously enough with the rise of the far right in her former region of East Germany, which is where it's mostly located. And by the way, that is also the COVID, the anti-vaxxer population is also in the least, and these two things are related. And social media and disinformation plays an enormous role in that region, the disinformation coming largely from Russia, which is not far. But she didn't deal sufficiently with the fact that not everybody in the East was as ready to adapt to the ways of the West as she was. She just immediately rolled up her sleeves and chose a new profession, left science for politics, and began her now legendary ascent a large number of her peers did not, and they feel that she did not acknowledge them sufficiently. It's not about the economy. It's because although the East is still a bit behind the West, it's had enormous infusions of support from the West. But it's about, you haven't recognized us. You haven't acknowledged our suffering during a half a century of communism, and that was fertile territory for the far right. But let me just quickly say that the far right is not ascendant in Germany. I think that of all the European countries, of all the countries in the West, Germany would be the last to fall for populism, because they have so processed their own dark history, so worked through that. But the East is behind the West in that process. And very late in her days in the Chancellery, she began to acknowledge her Eastern roots and and the fact that perhaps she should have spent more time kind of making those people feel that she hears them and that she sympathizes with them. It was the Alternative for Deutschland is also a child of the Merkel era.
In our last couple of minutes, Kati, I just want to ask a question about your own observations about the world in America. I mean, you grew up in Hungary, you grew up in a communist country. You know, you have had partners in life who straddled the world, and you with them, seeing all kinds of leaders all over the world. And I guess my question to you is, you look at this time, you just said America's in steadier hands, but there seems to be this lament around the world that America's not back where it was, trust is not where it is, the solvency of alliance is not what it was. And I'd just be interested in your insights in what it would take to restore American engagement in the world in the kind of principled way that Angela Merkel wanted to see.
Yes, well, we do have a model now to follow, and I say only half in jest that I hope that people in the Biden administration read my book for a good model to follow. And by the way, she is a ruthless politician when necessary. She's no pushover. She's, you know, to call her mutti, mommy, as some do, is to completely miss the fact that she is a deep strategic thinker. She sees not in news cycles. She thinks not in tomorrow's headline, but in how things fit in a historic pattern. And all, you know, these are important lessons that she leaves behind. But I'm as concerned as you are, both about what is happening in our country, and you know, we could go on for a long time discussing the origins of how we got here.
Well, we'll leave it there. I mean, it's an extraordinary book, and it's very rare to read a book, a biography of a foreign leader that matters as much to America in this case in reading it. It's just an extraordinary book. I highly recommend it. The book is The Chancellor, The Remarkable Odyssey of Angela Merkel, and the author is Kati Marton. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you, Steve. It's been a great pleasure. Thank you for having me.
So what's the bottom line? Angela Merkel really mattered for the West, but now she's history. America tripped and stepped back from its leadership role in the world, and Germany stepped in. France's Emmanuel Macron stepped up later, but it's clear that the world's leading democracies are just less compelling than they once were. Merkel's successor may really prove to be a strong force in the world. We hope so. Macron is up for election next year, and we're going to see if he remains or if he's replaced by someone who's inward-looking. What is clear is that liberalism as a political ethic, when that means human rights and civic justice, liberty, freedom, are more fragile in the West now more than they've been in decades. To preserve democracies and liberalism, these nations are going to need to generate more Angela Merkels. But let's be honest, that's really hard to do. And that's the bottom line.